On behalf of RPG Life Sciences and Nephrology Division of RPG Life Sciences, a warm welcome to all PG students of nephrology for a very unique program, uh, which is called as Nephrology Postgraduate Educational Program 2021, an educational initiative by Nephrology Division of RPG Life Sciences. This program is exclusively for the nephrology students who are doing the DM and DNB. Uh, to be very, happy to launch this program on this unique day, a day which is weighted by, students all across the world uh, in their lives to express their gratitude towards their gurus, teachers. And this day is of Guru Purnima, and today is that day. So launching an educational initiative on this day is not merely a coincidence, but blessings, passion, and concern of teacher, and who is called as teachers of teacher, uh, Dr. Chakujik. Uh, he is considered as the guru uh, in the field of nephrology. Uh, Thank you so much for joining us, sir, today. Not only sir, uh, Dr. Professor Chako sir has joined us, but his shishya, Dr. Shankar Sundaran Sundar sir has also joined us. This is a great moment that one guru and shishya, and that on Guru Purnima or educational initiative, a student is available with us. So this is a great offering uh, uh, by the teachers for the students. And not only he has done it today, but since several decades he has been doing, and he has trained thousands of students and trained thousands of teachers. So officially, I welcome today's faculty for this unique educational program. Before I would introduce Dr. Professor Chako sir, I would like to invite our specialty head of nephrology, Sanjeev Patnaik, to brief us about the company and about the company. So over to you, sir, Sanjeev sir.
Thanks, Dr. Mangesh. Good evening, one and all. Myself, Sanjeev Patnaik. I am head of nephrology at RPG Life Sciences. I will just take 30 seconds to just give you an introduction about RPG Life Sciences. It's a great honor and privilege to start this educational initiative in a very auspicious occasion, what Dr. Mangesh was telling, that Guru Purnima. And thank you so much, Professor Chako, for just giving your guiding star to kickstart this program. Just give you a brief introduction about RPG Life Sciences. RPG Life Sciences is a big conglomerate part of RPG Group, which is around $3.4 billion turnover company, which is operating almost around 100 countries plus worldwide, and with 20,000 employee base. RPG Life Sciences, also the RPG Group also operates in 5 key areas. You can see in the screen. Infrastructure through a company called as KEC International. It is one of the top companies in its field. Tires, CEAT Tire, the popular tire in entire Indian operation. We all know CEAT Tires. Then IT through a big arm of Gensar company. Then pharma, of course, RPG Life Sciences. And through energy, Raychem RPG. And in plantation, RPG Life Sciences has a company called as Harishan Malayalam. It is one of the biggest, largest producer of tea company across India, situated in Kerala. And so these are the 5 key areas where RPG Life Sciences, RPG Group operates. Now, if you just give a brief introduction about RPG Life Sciences, we all know that RPG Life Sciences inherited from GD Searle era of 1968. It's a long legacy of RPG Life Sciences there from 1968. We operate in 13 areas, and from there, nephrology, oncology, diabetic, cardiology, respiratory, pain management, these are the key areas where RPG Life Sciences operates. RPG also operates in 50 countries worldwide through its international formulation business. And we are a company backward integrated from API to formulations. Also, we have an employee base of 1100 plus. And RPG Life Sciences, I'm pleased to share with you, also nominated as a great place to work in FY21. So this is just a brief introduction about RPG Life Sciences. Over to you, Dr. Mangesh.
Yeah, thank you, sir. So students and the faculties, this is just a beginning. Today we would be having session 1 and the session name is Kidney Transplantation, Past, Present, and Future. And today we have with us Professor Dr. Chacko Jacob. This is an opportunity to introduce, probably and very frankly, he doesn't need any introduction, but I will introduce him. He has done MD/DM nephrology. He's a consultant nephrologist associated with Baptist Hospital. He was ex-HOD of CMC Bangalore. And let me tell you that he's been principal authors and authors for many books and several studies, which are in PubMed index studies, which are published on his name. He has been speaker for national and international conferences. He has been honored as the chairperson for several discussions in international forums. And in the field of nephrology, the nickname which I am known of him, like, he is known for teachers of teachers. So I would like to just introduce program modules also, that there are 7 sessions you can see on the screen. The first would be today, and then subsequently every month we would be having each session every month. The following is clinical transplant and immunology, present and future of immunosuppression, drugs and protocols, role of anti-proliferative agent in immunotransplantation, management of long-term transplantation and its complications, and the new aspects in AKI prevention and treatment, renal biopsy, and clinical pathological correlations. So this would be 7 sessions, but as you know, we are bringing best of the faculties on board for this particular sessions, as you can witness today. And the session would be every one session each month. It would be online teachings. As I shared with you, 7 sessions, but there would be 2 sessions on demand of PGs based on their requirements, such as, we took surveys, so we got feedback that they need some session on how to interpret the studies, how to calculate the sample size, how to understand the statistics, and so on. So there are many suggestions. So we'll pick up the most important suggestion, and we'll also add 2 more sessions to these 7 sessions based on demand. There would be post-session assessment. Today we have assessment. At the end of session, there would be a link displayed in the Q&A box and chat box. So you can click and you can give answers. It would be objective. 20 questions are there, and you would be getting 10 to 15 minutes to resolve those questions. Based on the session, based on your results, there would be rewards after 5th session. So you have to attend 5 sessions to be eligible for rewards, and there would be rewards. But today I would like to just give you a brief about. You would be having you would be getting certification of participation after completion of 5 sessions. So without taking much time, I would hand over session to Professor Dr. Chacko Jacob, sir. So over to you, sir.
Thank you, Sanjeev and Mangesh. Thank you very much. Actually, I don't know whether it is accidental or deliberate that this has actually been scheduled to be on Guru Purnima Day. So I would like to actually dedicate this talk to my teachers, Dr. K.V. Johnny, who is in Cochin, and 3 of them unfortunately have passed on. Dr. J.C.M. Shastri, whom many of you know and have worked with, Dr. John Dossiter from Edmonton, Alberta, with whom I trained in the late 70s, and later Dr. Timothy Matthew, who was in Adelaide, who also passed away last year. So I think I would like to dedicate this talk to these teachers of mine. But I think the main teachers are actually the students, because when they read up and ask questions, you are compelled to read. So I think the biggest teachers are actually your own students. Anyway, when Dr. Balarao sent me the list of 6 topics and said, would I like to talk on any of them? I said, no, I am not going to prepare any more talks, but I'd like to give this one particular talk if it is acceptable to you. And the main reason I've chosen this is because at least in the earlier days, when you sit for the exam, particularly at the Viva, a lot of questions related to history of nephrology are asked. And this is one area where students are quite lacking. For example, if I ask you, do you know where the first kidney transplant in India was done? Many people would say CMC Vellore. That is the first successful transplant. But earlier transplants were actually done at the KEM Hospital, Mumbai, and at the Banaras Hindu University by Professor Udupa and his group. Of course, they did deceased donor transplants in the late 50s, and they were all unsuccessful. So the first successful kidney transplant in India was done in CMC Vellore, but that was not the beginning of the transplant program in India. So these are little points which people are not aware of. Anyway, we'll go on to the main topic, which is the renal transplant past, present, and future. And I'd like to take this in various eras, the early era of organ transplantation, and then the time where there was a rapid progress occurred in the field of transplantation, then reflect on what we are, where we are at the present, and what does the future hold for us. Now, transplantation actually historically, in mythology, there is the chimera, which is the figure you see on the left, on the top. And this is a mythical animal with a lion's head, a sheep's body, and a serpent's tail. And any person who has multiple mixture of genes can also be called, is now called as a chimera. Now, chimera is a Greek, of Greek origin, but closer to home and closer to us is the famous story or mythology of Lord Ganesha, who underwent a transplantation of his head. So people have been talking about or looking at organ transplants for a long time. The first recorded picture of transplantation from the West dates back to 600 BC, when two saints, Damien and Cosmos, are supposed to have removed the gangrenous leg of a white man and transplanted it with the leg of a black or a dark man or a Moor. So if you look at the picture there, you'll find that the left leg is white and the right leg is black. And it's not black because it's gangrenous, because the gangrenous foot is down on the ground. It's been, to make it more dramatic, they've colored it as though the donation came from a black person. Now, the early experiments of transplantation, in the first experimental kidney transplants were performed in France, in Lyon, by Matthew Jaboulet. So he's actually the person who sort of spearheaded transplant. Now, one of his students, Alexis Carrel, actually fine-tuned or developed the process of vascular anastomosis, which is essential for organ transplantation, which resulted in Carrel receiving the Nobel Prize in 1921 for his work on vascular anastomosis. Alexis Carrel also worked with the famous aviator Charles Lindbergh and developed a machine for perfusion of organs as early as in the late 20s and 30s. So people have been working hard on the field of transplantation. But the first human-to-human kidney transplant was done in 1933 by a Russian surgeon called Voronoi. Now, he actually implanted the kidney, transplanted kidney on the medial side of the thigh of the recipient. So this is a pictorial representation of that surgery, where you find that the kidney is anastomosed to the femoral profunda femoris and artery and vein, and the ureter is left dangling out of the skin. So if this was the technique to be followed now, all patients with transplants would be incontinent and would be constantly dripping urine down the medial side of their thigh. This is an ancient retrograde pyelogram of such an operation, where the transplanted kidney is located on the medial side of the thigh, and the ureter is draining out onto the skin. Of course, fortunately, these kidneys didn't work, and so patients were not had the embarrassment of urine dripping down their down the leg. Now, the major unresolved problem after transplant was that of rejection. And scientists needed to know why organs were being rejected. And the pioneering work of Sir Peter Medawar and John Dosey and others followed. Their work was more of experimental work, whereas in the clinical work, Dr. Joseph Murray, who subsequently did the successful live donor transplant in Boston, was involved in the clinical work. So in the 40s, Peter Medawar at the University of London experimented with the immunological basis of organ rejection. This was mainly on skin grafts. And by the 50s, cortisone-like medications were used to suppress the human body's self-defense or the immune system. This use of steroids resulted in some degree of transplant success. The understanding of why our organs get rejected was actually can be attributed to the HLA system, which all of you know about. And it was 1958 that a French scientist called Jean Dosey noticed that the blood from one person would react with white blood cells of another. And this was the basis of the discovery of the human leukocyte antigen system. He called it the major antigen complex. Now, for describing the HLA system, which was something novel at that time, Dosey, along with others, was awarded the Nobel Prize. So that is #2 Nobel Prize in transplant. Now, Dr. Joseph Murray, who had been doing experimental work, was very fortunate that in 1954, he had a pair of twins, identical twins, one of whom had end-stage kidney disease, and the other who offered to give the kidney to his twin brother. These donor and recipient pair were known as the Herrick twins. And in 1954, Joseph Murray and his colleagues at the Peter Ben Brigham Hospital in Boston, which is part of the Harvard Medical School, performed the first truly successful kidney transplant from one twin to the other. Because they were identical twins, they were able to manage this transplant without the use of any immunosuppressive medications. Surgery still was not flash at that time, or not perfected, and really the improvement in surgical technique was largely attributed to this person, Dr. Thomas E. Starzl, who was an American surgeon who came to UK and worked to train in transplant surgery. Subsequently, Dr. Starzl went back to the US and set up initially the transplant program in Denver and then moved to Pittsburgh. And today there is a huge multi-organ transplant center which is named after Thomas Starzl. It's called the Thomas E. Starzl Transplant Center. Now, as we know, very little was known about immunosuppression at that time. And so various modalities of trying to suppress the immune response were tried. And these were all mostly, the programs were run by surgeons. So they used X-rays, bone marrow infusion, donor-recipient matching, and also with some medications, including cortisone, for stopping the rejection process. In Cambridge, Sir Roy Khan, who was a professor of transplant surgery at Cambridge, under whom Thomas Starzl trained, was the first to actually use two of the major immunosuppressive drugs that we still use today, use of azathioprine and cyclosporin for suppressing the immune response. And now, if you look at the history of medications which have been available, in the 60s, the two drugs that were available, 60s and 70s, early 70s actually, there were only two drugs that were available, steroids and azathioprine. Azathioprine was actually synthesized in the Burroughs Wellcome Laboratory by a lady called Gertrude, and she also won a Nobel Prize actually. So for many years, Burroughs Wellcome had the sole proprietary thing of producing azathioprine. And just as an offshoot, in the late 70s or early, probably in the early 80s, they suddenly, Burroughs Wellcome hiked up the price of Imuran, as it was called there, as azathioprine was called Imuran, by threefold. It used to cost 7 rupees for a 50 milligram tablet, and they made overnight, they made it 21 rupees. And 21 rupees, and many patients requiring two, that is 42 rupees a day in the early 70s or in the early 80s was a huge amount for most people. And the drug became very scarce because they stopped manufacturing and said they were importing it. At that point in time, one of the senior nephrologists approached a relative of his who was actually a scientist who had retired from Glaxo and joined what was then known as Searle India. And Dr. Lal was approached and he said, see, this is a small chemical molecule. It's not impossible to produce it. And that was the birth of Azoran. And then, of course, there were clinical trials and equivalent studies and reports that it was this thing. So really the indigenization of azathioprine is attributable to the efforts of Dr. Lal, who was the scientist, and Mr. Fatehperkar, who was the salesperson who used to run around, and we were all involved in those early trials. So until the mid 70s, the two drugs that were available were azathioprine and prednisolone. In 1970, the polyclonal antibody anti-thymocyte globulin became available. 1980s saw the OKT3 or monoclonal antibody OKT3, and also the introduction of cyclosporin into the transplant immunosuppressive armamentarium. Around the same time, late 80s, the Japanese were working on a molecule which they called FK506, which is subsequently now renamed as what we know as tacrolimus. So in the 90s, we had both tacrolimus and mycophenolate. Mycophenolate actually is a very old drug, but its use as an immunosuppressant was sort of worked out in the 90s. Then, of course, the humanized monoclonal antibodies, and also the development of sirolimus. Now, we go on to the era of rapid progress, which is actually the late 70s and early 80s. And the single most important molecule that actually changed the whole face of solid organ transplant was the work of Dr. Borrell in the Sandoz lab. What is now Novartis was known as Sandoz in those days. And Dr. Borrell actually found or worked out the immunosuppressive properties of cyclosporin. The drug had been available with Sandoz for many years prior to that. It was actually introduced as an antifungal agent, and then they found that it was very nephrotoxic, so it was not used. But Borrell worked out that it has great immunosuppressive properties and fine-tuned it. And this was the first molecule to actually generate more than $1 billion in sales, because Sandoz had the exclusive rights patent for many, many years. Now, subsequently, a person of Indian origin, Dr. Suren Sehgal at Wyeth, worked out the immunosuppressive properties of another fungal product called rapamycin. This is called rapamycin because it was discovered on the Easter Islands, and the local name for their Easter Islands is Rapa Nui. And Dr. Sehgal actually came to India and attended one of our ISOT meetings in the 1950s in Chennai. And at that time, he said that if ever the drug comes to India, I want you people involved in the trial. And we actually were involved in the early trials of rapamycin. It's a great drug, but it has so many side effects that actually it is not used very much these days. But reduced incidence of rejection with the use of cyclosporin, tacrolimus, mycophenolate, monoclonal antibodies, and other medications which were now available improved both the 1 and 5 year graft survival. And cyclosporin, as I mentioned, transformed the field of transplantation with a dramatic reduction in acute rejection rates in the early 80s. Tacrolimus came about a decade later and was introduced in the 90s and found to be more potent in reducing acute rejection episodes. The relative effects of tacrolimus and cyclosporin on short and long-term graft survival. A 1 year graft survival rate in 2,366 recipients receiving these drugs was 69%. By comparison, both tacrolimus, which was known as FK506, and cyclosporin increased the 1 year graft survival rates to 90+%. And the long-term graft survival as measured by half-life. However, the long-term half-life did not really change very much. It varied between 8 to 9 years. Between the other therapies and cyclosporin group, there was a significant increase, particularly in those on tacrolimus, and the half-life went up to about 14 years. The other group of drugs which became available around that time was what I talked about, the sirolimus and everolimus. These are inhibitors of the mammalian receptor of rapamycin, and clinically there are 3 products which are available, 2 in India, sirolimus and everolimus, and there is also another product called temsirolimus. The primary immunosuppressive mechanism action of these agents has been attributed to the forming of a complex with a FK binding protein, which fuses with the mammalian receptor of rapamycin and interrupts the downstream cell signaling and thereby reduces the risk of rejection. That the use of biological agents and monoclonal antibodies, anti-T cell receptor agents, inhibition of the first point of antigen presentation has been an attractive target in transplant immunosuppression. The first monoclonal antibody which was available was a murine anti-CD3 antibody, which was called OKT3. OKT3 standing for orthoclone because it came from Ortho Laboratories, which was part of the Johnson & Johnson group. And this was the first monoclonal antibody which was approved as a drug for human use for prevention of rejection, not only in kidney, but also heart and liver transplants. Various other targets of the rejection pathway have been targeted. Their co-stimulation blockade by CD124, CD20 antibody, which is called an anti-CD40 monoclonal antibody, and number of molecules which are being investigated for blockage of the CD40 antibody. Another group of drugs which came around probably late 80s, early 90s, were the interleukin-2 receptor blockers, basiliximab, which is the only one which is surviving now. It's an interleukin-2 receptor blocker. Others like interleukin-6 blockers are also being tried in the prevention of rejection. And so interleukin-2 receptor blocker, basiliximab, actually is quite extensively used even now, and it actually reduces the incidence of early acute cellular rejection and makes life easier for the management in the early stages of transplantation. Pooled polyclonal antibodies as immunosuppressive agents, multiple antibodies, immunoglobulins are available, polyclonal anti-thymocyte globulin, then the various lymphocyte depleting agents, and Campath-H also are some of the other polyclonal antibodies. Now, co-stimulation blockade by CD154, CD40 targeting monoclonal antibodies. Again, many of these are being tried. The problem with all of these are that they're very expensive, and so may not be very easy for us to use in our context. Now, we know that the antibody-mediated rejection is through mainly by the antibodies secreted by B cells. So anti-CD20 targeting rituximab and various other monoclonal antibodies have also been tried. The rituximab is a chimeric CD20 monoclonal antibody, which is 30% murine and 70% human, and this leads to B cell depletion. The other drug which has been tried are the bortezomib, which is used mainly for treatment of multiple myeloma, and this is again been useful in some cases of the antibody-mediated rejection. Now, the good old drugs, how does the cortisone act? Cortisone binds to intracellular glucocorticoid receptors and modulates a multitude of cellular functions binding to glucocorticoid responsive elements in the nucleus. The effects on the immune system are also numerous, but clearly related to inhibition of cytokine transcription and blocking of transcription factors. Eculizumab is a humanized monoclonal antibody to the fifth component of complement that effectively inhibits its cleavage, and the use of eculizumab for the treatment of antibody-mediated rejections are currently coming out as mainly as case reports. No major studies or randomized controlled trials are used. Its use as for prevention of antibody-mediated rejection as part of the desensitization protocol in sensitized patients has been found to be beneficial. The cost of eculizumab remains a major limiting factor for its use. Back to some of our solid drugs which have been available for a long time. Azathioprine is a derivative of 6-mercaptopurine, and it's one of the earliest drugs which act as anti-proliferative agents. Mycophenolate mofetil and mycophenolate sodium act on the inosine monophosphate dehydrogenase system and thereby prevent T-cell proliferation. Now, the more powerful the immunosuppression, you are actually reducing the recipient or the individual's immunity. And the more powerful immunosuppressive agents you use, you start seeing more and more of infections. The particular worry is CMV, which has been reported as high as 32%, pneumocystis between 2 to 5%, and BK virus about 8%. So the harder you hit the immune system, the trade-off is the risk of chronic infections. Now, having said all this, what can we do to, what are the things which we need to look at? One of the things that people are looking at is the steroid avoidance or withdrawal. And the reason for why steroid this thing is because you know that there are so many side effects of steroids, weight gain, diabetes, and so many other bone problems, etc. But most of the studies have shown that it is better to go for steroid avoidance rather than withdrawal. Because if you start off without steroids right from the beginning, the risk of rejection is not as high as if you give steroids for a period of time and then withdraw it. The other thing that people are worried about is the nephrotoxicity and neurotoxicity and diabetogenic effects of the calcineurin inhibitors. So looking at drugs which can be used as substitute for calcineurin inhibitors or for avoidance of CNIs. But as I said, the rapamycin or sirolimus came up with very attractive because it has no nephrotoxicity, but the incidence of hyperlipidemia, delayed wound healing is just atrocious. So finally, I think people hold it in reserve. The other thing is, of course, the therapeutic drug monitoring, which my old center CMCs are leaders in, and that is really tailored so that you don't over immunosuppress or under immunosuppress. They actually do routinely AUC studies for mycophenolate and various other, and of course, tacrolimus CNI levels are monitored frequently. The other thing is that there is always going to be a shortage of donors. So how can we promote deceased donor organ donation? And more recently now, the paired donation or the domino donation or exchange donation, as it is called, is gaining some popularity, and the Ahmedabad group actually has done a lot of work on this. Now, when you talk of graft survival, if you can induce tolerance, that is, the body refuses to recognize this as a foreign tissue and mount a rejection response, then you have achieved a great thing. So some work in this was done by the late Professor Trivedi, but I don't think we have been able to actually replicate his work. What about the future of solid organ transplantation? If living donors are going to be scarce, can we get tissue from some other species, xenotransplantation? Then stem cells in regeneration of organs. There's a lot of work going on this. Can you clone the organ? Can you induce tolerance? And finally, the implantable artificial kidney. Now, one of the major barriers to xenotransplantation is the hyperacute rejection due to the alpha-gal epitope. And the second worry is, of course, the transmission of zoonotic infections, that is, infections which are present in another species. If we harvest organs from them, will humans get those infections, which may be very difficult to diagnose and treat? And of course, the animal activists will come up with the ethical consideration of sacrificing animals for humans. Now, surprisingly, the genetically humans and pigs are genetically close. In fact, so when somebody calls somebody and says, don't be a pig, they're not really that far off, actually. So genetically engineered pigs with deletion of pig antigens or with insertion of protected human genes are actually available. And blocking the CD40, CD154 co-stimulation pathway in non-human primate pig kidneys have survived for many months without rejection. So maybe these the pig organs from pigs can be offered to those whose life expectancy is going to be short. That's the people with multiple organ dysfunction, or elderly patients who are waiting, not doing well on dialysis. Maybe people like that can be, it's not experimentation, it's just that is an option for people whose other chances of survival are very limited. Stem cells, as I mentioned, do show promising results in regeneration of the organs, but they also have a high risk of developing teratomas. So one needs to overcome this problem of teratoma production with stem cells. Now, cloning of animals and human is possible today, as you know, and the most famous, of course, was Dolly the sheep, which was cloned. But the problem is that cloning a human, it raises major ethical considerations, because you're then actually, if we believe that man or human species is created by God, then we are playing God by trying to clone and produce human beings with normal kidneys. In 50 years or less, will transplantation of human organs become obsolete? I think probably it's going to be much sooner than 50 years, because the world's first bionic kidney is all set to replace dialysis in just 2 years. And this is actually work done in University of San Francisco, where they have actually a hybrid containing a filter side, which is a silicon membrane, which will filter the blood and remove the toxins, and a cellular side, which is in the second stage, bed of transplanted kidney cells will regulate the chemical balance of the blood. And of course, for a long time, we have been hearing that this will be available in 2 years. And if it is available, it will look something like this, like a transplant, but instead of a human organ, it will be the artificial kidney, which will be implanted. And of course, this is bad news for Mangesh and co, because once you do something like this, you don't need immunosuppressive drugs. And it's also bad news for people who are doing the tissue typing program. You know, all the wonderful methods of cross-matching and Luminex and single bead and whatever else. But it will make life very easy for the clinician, because you can give a prescription and say, go to the market and buy a kidney and we will put it in for you. So we don't know whether I will see it in my lifetime, but I think many of the students will probably be able to do that. And just in closing, I just want to show you that organ transplantation has been something which has which the pioneering work has resulted in many people receiving, not many, but a significant number of people receiving the Nobel Prize. So I mentioned Alexis Carrel in 1912 for vascular anastomosis, and 1960 Sir Frank McFarlane Burnett and Peter Medawar for looking at tolerance. 1980, Dorset and others for the HLA system. 1990, even though Dr. Murray and team did the transplant in 1954, they had to wait till 1990 to get the Nobel Prize for that surgery. 1998, again, much later, after the synthesis of azathioprine by Gertrude Alien and George Hastings, they were given the Nobel Prize. And of course, more recently in 2011, the dendritic cells and its importance was worked out by Ralph Steinman, so he received the Nobel Prize. So I mean, don't think that you can't do it. If you come up with something really tremendous, you may be in line for a Nobel Prize. So I will stop at this stage, and I think if Mangesh or Sanjeev or Sundar or anybody has comments, I'd be happy to listen to that. Questions? Yes, but also.
Wonderful thing, sir. Wonderfully covered everything. Sir, please, your comments. Then we'll go for the agenda.
Very good to hear the entire story of transplant. Especially history of transplant is important. And I think we should mention about the CMC Vellore longest living transplant who was entered the Guinness Book record. I think a few words about him will be nice, sir. He's actually, I think he's only on azathioprine and prednisolone. I don't think he's on cyclosporine. Mr. Sharma.
Yeah, I think I've been in contact with this chap quite recently. He actually, when this COVID first wave came, he looked up the Google and found my name and rang up Baptist Hospital and asked for my number. And of course, they won't give the number, but they told him which days I came there. So on one of the days when I was in the outpatient clinic, I got this call and he said, Krishnaram Sharma. I said, Ganga Nagar kaisa hai? And he really, I think I fell off the chair probably, because it's 44 years ago, and he's done very well. And as you said, Sundar, he's on taking only 10 milligrams. He still takes 10 milligrams of prednisolone. I can convince him to go down below that, and he takes 50 milligrams of azathioprine. And that's it. And 44 years he has survived without any problem.
No rejection, no nothing. I mean, it's amazing.
No infections. I mean, maybe minor infections, but nothing significant. And the person who is really working very hard to get all this documented is his son, who is a dentist in New
Right.
Jersey.
He keeps calling me regularly and talking to me
Yeah.
because of the CMC connection. But do you remember anybody else, sir, of that vintage from your experience? Because I started my program in 1987 in Bangalore, for the earliest, and I still have a lot of people from that era, but they're on cyclosporin or azathioprine. They're not only on azathioprine, but they're still on small dose of cyclosporin, azathioprine, prednisolone, 30 years plus going on, quite a few of them, and with the renal functions normal. And I think that, as you rightly said, it is something to do with immune tolerance. I keep saying that transplant is like marriage. It's a curse for some, blessing for many, but you got to take the risk.
I think I looked at the CMC data over the decades from the 70s, 80s, 90s, and 2000. And unfortunately, from the 70s, the 10-year survival is only around 30%. So very few from the 70s are alive. But I think, but from the 80s onwards, there are, again, not large number of survivors, but I think quite a few are surviving. Of course, now you can expect 90 plus 1 year and 5 year graph survivals. And
I think the 1 year survival has been good. The long-term survival is still, we have got to do a lot of work. I agree with you.
Yeah, I think the long-term survival is, I mean, if you look at it, other than the ones that go with infection, which is, the sort of early loss is due to infection, the others are all sort of isn't it? Called chronic allograft. They get into proteinuria, back into renal failure, back on dialysis. In fact, they say that I think I may be correct, the US RDS data, 30% of patients on dialysis are patients who have lost their transplant and are back on dialysis.
That's actually the fourth or fifth cause for ESRD is transplant failure. I agree with you.
Yeah. So
and that actually, even I'm seeing now the last 5-10 years, I'm seeing quite a few transplants, which are my own transplants who have failed over 15, 20 years, coming for second transplant, third transplant. This was not there before. And the other thing which I think is important now is that I was talking to Dr. CM Thiagarajan, again, your colleague and senior nephrologist from Chennai. He was saying the COVID era, he has lost a lot of patients due to COVID, and it was quite sad. He was feeling, and that's what we also saw. More than the first wave, the second wave, quite a few transplant patients, recipients have lost, and we had to stop immunosuppression, and they're back on dialysis. It's been a difficult time.
Right. I would request participants, they can ask questions by typing into Q&A box. Before you, while you're typing, we have another initiative dedicated for students. So I would like to ask Sanjeev sir to brief about it.
Yeah, good evening, one and all again. Just I will take few seconds till the time question answer box is filled up with questions. In this era of digital or physical, you can say, we coined a name called as phygital. We introduced one of the unique services for the doctors called as RPG Sir. It's anytime, anywhere digital support system to the doctors. This is nothing but a small, if you log into rpgsir.com, it is something works like Arabia Setu app. You enter your registered mobile number and there is a OTP comes. Then you just enter that OTP, then you log into page of RPG Sir. So in RPG Sir, once you log in, you will see a page wherein 6 services are there. So where first one is dedicated to, of course, to COVID-19 care. Then one topic specifically dedicated to COVID-19 source, wherein all the COVID material which is available across globe, across India, it is being given there, which is being uploaded every 1 week time. Then comes scientific update, and then comes scientific support, patient education, and a contact us button. I'll take you to the scientific update part. In scientific update part, if you see that scientific support here in slide deck is available for all the nephrology topics. So we can just log in, you can download or email all those slide decks immediately to your email IDs. This is, we have done a survey through all the nephrologists across India. We found 3 trending topics now in nephrology. One is ABO incompatibility transplantation. The second is AKI and biomarkers. And the third, what Professor Chacko has already sir has highlighted about artificial kidney updates. These are the 3 trending topics. Every 15 days it is being uploaded. Then we have a dedicated slide decks for the nephrologist. Then published case studies also, if at all internationally or India, any case publication is there, it is there. You can just go there, you can download and you can read through at your leisure time. Then case studies by Accept. Here in Indian doctors, nephrologist case studies is also have been published. Just like this, there will be series of topics are there. You can just go and click it. Within a button, you can just, the PPT will open, you can read through, or you can just download in your device. It is mobile friendly, it can be downloaded. There is a series of 23 topics are there. And you can see here, there is a clinically important published case studies by Indian nephrologists. Details are there and it is being uploaded every 15 days. And in abstract service, as good as 15 July recent updates are there. So every 15 days, you will get some new content to read. Yeah, also with this education initiative program, it happens and then again we forget. We try to download entire program on this. Suppose any doctors or any PG student wants to refer this article, this talk later on, they can easily go there. This is a recent topic which has happened, I think, during the month of May or June when Professor Chacko and Professor Dr. Kher was there. They're talking on role of Ajothapa in renal transplanters. Like that, several eCME webinar topics are also downloaded there.
Yes, sir. Thank you for briefing the RPG, sir. It's really unique program. We can take now questions from the participants. So, question by Dr. Mohit Mishra. Recent data of SGBGI, they told that COVID mortality in transplant recipient is approximately 6%. What has your experience been? So, Dr. Chacko, sir, or Dr. Shankar?
Yeah, I do have no experience with patients on post-transplant with COVID infection. Sundar will be able to answer that because he was mentioning something. Sundar?
The first wave, the mortality was not so bad. Second wave, my experience, I lost quite a bit. And 6% SGPGI, I think, I would say very good. I mean, I think our own feeling is about 30% mortality has been there. And the question they've asked about vaccination and stopping immunosuppression, I definitely believe transplant recipients would need a 3rd dose. I think if you look at the New York transplant surgeon who has had a heart transplant, he himself says 3rd dose is needed for transplant recipients. But I would not withhold any medication for the vaccination because transplant is something unique. I know the rheumatologists routinely stop the immunosuppression before vaccination. They can afford to do that because rheumatoid arthritis or whatever. At the most, it will be some joint pain will be there. But with a transplant, modifying immunosuppression, in my opinion, is not safe because even if you reduce or stop the immunosuppression, the chance of rejection are high and going for a second transplant becomes difficult. So our own advice, even the Indian Society of Organ Transplant, the Transplant Society, we do not advocate reducing the immunosuppression or stopping immunosuppression for the sake of vaccination. What do you say, Dr. Chacko, sir?
Yeah, I think one question I get asked very often phone calls is, whether they should take the vaccine, and I encourage all of them to take it.
Correct.
I don't think we should withhold immunosuppression during that time. As you said, they may have a little bit more incidence of pain, fever or mild symptoms, but I think that is something they can live with. About the 3rd dose, the limitation is the fact that the entire dosing is controlled by the government.
Correct.
Whether you want the 3rd dose or not, unless the government says you can have it, you can't have it.
Correct. Unless you do illegal thing, I agree with you. Legally, you cannot have a 3rd dose, which is sad actually. Actually, it should have been left to us, medical person, to decide what dose we should give. I agree with you.
Right. There's a question. What is percentage of transplant patient who survived more than 30 years?
I think Dr. Chako gave those figures, 30 years. I think, sir, your CMC figures, 30 years survival.
It will be around 40%.
I think so. My own experience, I feel I started in 1987. So it will be about 30-40%. I agree.
Yeah.
Mr. Singh is asking that how about including immunological tolerance? Where are we now?
I think Dr. Chako has answered that beautifully because the main work was done by Dr. Trivedi, injecting some thymos and doing bone marrow transplant along with that. Some of it is not caught up. We are not able to replicate that. And I personally believe that as of now, we don't have any way where we can get tolerance. I'm sure Dr. Chako would be able to.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think, Dr. Trivedi said he used to get his fellows to inject stem cells into the thymus and all that. And but unfortunately, and then he said that the patients were able to survive without immunosuppression or minimal immunosuppression. But talking to clinicians who were following up these patients elsewhere, they said all of them ended up requiring immunosuppression. So I think as of now, I don't think there is any protocol available which is safe and will provide induction of tolerance. Naturally, people may develop tolerance like the one we are talking about, Krishna Ram Sharma, 44 years on 10 prednisone. He's probably developed, naturally he has developed tolerance, but induction of tolerance, I'm not sure is going to work.
Dr. Devdas is asking that this is post kidney transplantation in 2001 in CMC Vellore, having cyst in kidney USG, also having DVT thrombosis detected in the vein with fungal infection in the skin. Creatinine is 1.67. Please suggest, sir. I think
I can't see that question actually. What he had a transplant?
yeah, you can click Q&A box.
Q&A, we click, we can see it.
Yes. And the last question. It's the last question.
Cysts in the kidney means in the transplanted kidney, is it?
Looks like that. He says 2001 CMC Vellore transplant having cysts in the kidney. I don't know whether he's meaning transplant kidney or native kidneys. He's not mentioned that.
Yeah.
Because he's if he's having cysts in the native kidney, that's okay. That is normal.
Also having DVT thrombosis detected in
and fungal infection. I think these are, it's created 1.67. So you be a little on the higher side. We don't know what medications immunosuppression is taking. I think that's important.
Yeah, but I think whatever it is, if, fungal infections of the skin, terbinafine can be used quite safely. We have used it quite extensively, particularly in people with the nail infections. It depends on what fungus, but I think that can be seen. So and if he's having DVT, I think you need to put him on probably either warfarin or Coumadin anticoagulation, because
we don't know whether DVT is acute or chronic. I think he should talk to his vascular surgeon and then take a call, I suppose.
Yeah.
He said DVT thrombosis.
Right.
We need more data. I think best would be for him to send the data to Dr. Chako or to us in a mail or to one of you, and then we will be able to. Because we need some more data. The data given is very insufficient.
From Bangladesh, Dhaka, we have Dr. Osmani, Abdul Salam Osmani. He has conveyed his thanks to sir, and God bless you, sir. Thank you. Conveying regards.
Salam Usmani is an interesting man. He's a nephrologist himself. He came to me with a hip problem. We had to do hip replacement. Then he had a transplant. He had multiple issues with vascular access. And he and his wife, you must admire both of them. Now it is 6-7 years post-transplant, doing well. And he's doing a lot of service to the patients in Dhaka. He takes care of them. He advises them. So he's a good ambassador for India in Bangladesh to help our patients. Thank you, Usmani. Salam to you.
So both of you, he has conveyed his regards. So he has also asked question, antibody titer after COVID vaccine in kidney transplantation. Any study available?
I think they have done some studies. I think that's what, based on those studies, definitely they are saying that a third dose will be needed because they are saying the first one dose, two doses is not eliciting that much response. And again, depends on the type of vaccine, what vaccine they're taking. Whether they're taking the Pfizer vaccine or the Chinese vaccine, we don't know what type of vaccine. Definitely, I'm doing the study is still going on. But we are doing some studies on this, and there are multiple studies going on, the effect of vaccination in transplant. So we'll come to know soon. But definitely the immune system being low in a transplant recipient because of medication, the antibody response will be low. And that's the reason why we are suggesting maybe a third dose would be scientific advice. That's what we feel. Okay.
Right. As just seeing the questions. Right. The questions are not there. I would like to assure participants that video link of this session definitely available for you, as well as very shortly you would be receiving scientific notes of the Dr. Chaco's presentation, and there would be exam, and its link would be displayed in the chat box, and it would be active for next 15 minutes. So I would like to request our backend team to put that link in the chat box, and as well as Q&A box, so they can see, and you can give the exam. So meanwhile, I would like to request our managing director, Mr. Yugal Sikri, to speak about the program and deliver the thank you note as well as gratitude to our respected speakers.
Thanks, Dr. Mangesh. It's a personal, huge delight for me to be listening to the most powerful, impactful, and the most respectable great doctors, professors, Professor Dr. Chaco, Dr. Shankaran Sundar, for delivering such a wonderful session. Sir, I want to tell you that I'm a pharmacist. I also studied pharmacology long back from Institute of Medical Sciences. And today, the landscape which you presented today on transplant, past, present, and future was a visual delight. Visual delight. You took the whole subject on transplant such a wonderful way, and the way you ended by bringing bionic kidney, and you talked about implantation kidney, and you also gave the dream to all the future PG students that how they can become a Nobel laureate still in the field of transplantation. What else could have been a wonderful thing coming from a revered professor like you to the PG students? I really loved the way Dr. Shankaran mentioned that transplantation is like marriage. Curse for some, blessing for many. You need to take risk. I can understand the wisdom, the intellectual, yet a bit of sense of wit and humor, which as typical good professors bring in their classes. I'm sure this initiative of bringing such revered professors to the PG students couldn't have asked for a better platform or better kickoff platform than what it is today. I realize when a Bangladesh doctor, nephrologist also asking questions, it has not become a PG student forum. It has also become almost like an international education forum where we have the students of Dr. Chaco and the admirers of Dr. Chaco and Dr. Sundar came online. I'm personally extremely thankful to Dr. Shankaran Sundar and Professor Dr. Chaco for sparing your time for the good of PG students and for the doctor community as a whole. This initiative, I'm so very happy that RPG could host this initiative. And it's not the end. We have 6 more topics coming up going forward, and which would benefit the students. It's not the initiative or the platform, but I think these are the professors who really make a big difference. I also teach management in NMIMS University, so I know that what teaching means I also want to continue associated with teaching despite being the managing director of pharma company, because teaching is something which gives you great pleasure. And I could see the pleasure on the faces of the Professor Dr. Chacko and Professor and Dr. Shankar Sundaram. Thank you so very much for sparing time, and we'll continue to reach to you, sirs, for your wisdom to be disseminated to the students at large and the nephrologists at large. Thank you so very, very much from the bottom of my heart and from RPG Life Sciences. Thank you so very much. We being interested in this field, we having got the entire immunosuppressant range. We want to continue to be associated with nephrology in all times to come. And we are just a call away from you if you think we can do something in this field, because emotionally also we are attached in this field, being part of this field for a very, very long time with Azoran, Immunotech, RPimmune, and Mofetec. So thank you so very, very much. And I must also thank the doctors who are online attending this classic tutorial session, and I'm sure you will stand to get benefited and would participate in the quiz. I like the way the term was used, examination. It reminds Professor Dr. Chacko and Professor Dr. Shankaran that that's how the PG students will take this session. Thank you so very, very much. God bless.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for being at today Guru Purnima. So it is having teachers today.
Mangesh, one last question is there. Would you ask? Mangesh, one last question is there from Dr. Alok Kumar Mahapatra before concluding.
Okay. Is there?
Yeah, one more question is there.
Okay,
we'll take up before closing.
Sir, most common renal involvement in CKD on HD and transplant patients. Shankar sir, Sundaram sir.
I think in my experience, the commonest, I think when I was with Dr. Chacko as a student, only 1% of our dialysis population was diabetic nephropathy. But now 50% of our patients are diabetic CKD. So we can say the commonest cause that way would be diabetic CKD, which is going on into dialysis ESRD. Yeah. That's the commonest. And even in transplant, we are seeing this diabetic CKD coming back because of poor control of sugars. And as Dr. Chacko said, the people on dialysis in US, the fourth commonest cause is transplant kidney failure. The transplant kidney fails due to rejection or recurrence of the disease, and so on. That's the way. But I would say the message would be diabetic CKD. What do you say, sir?
Yeah, for COVID perspective, in COVID perspective.
No, I not relate. Even without COVID, diabetic CKD is the commonest for us. Yes,
yeah,
sir.
There's no doubt that when you sit in the outpatient, probably 70%, 80% of patients you see are diabetics with kidney disease. So it's definitely the most common cause now. As you said, Sundar, when you were training and we were all trainees and young saying glomerular nephritis was supposed to be the most common cause of CKD, but that's no longer true, because one is that you don't see much glomerular nephritis, acute nephritis these days, and secondly, the diabetes and diabetic nephropathy has really just the number of diabetics is so huge and it is so poorly controlled in this country that that the major cause is definitely today diabetic nephropathy. Even if you walk into the dialysis room, more than 70%, 80% of patients are diabetic who are on dialysis.
Right. I think you must have seen his questions also. So he's also asking in perspective of COVID, the patients CKD on HD and transplant patients for COVID.
COVID is of late we are seeing COVID-induced diabetes also. Even in those patients who are not on dialysis, I'm talking to my infectious disease colleagues. Definitely, the COVID is affecting many organs. We have seen actually in transplant at least 2 cases where the COVID has caused pancreatic damage and pancreatic failure, and patients have died because of pancreatitis, acute pancreatitis. COVID can cause many things. I think it's still unknown. A lot of research is going on. Still, we don't know what's happening. It could affect many organs. That's true.
Right. I would like again reiterate the participants to give the exam, and after fifth session, there would be very exciting rewards and certificate of participation authorized by the stalwarts of nephrologists would be available for you. The video link of this program would be available now. Within a 10-15 minutes, you would be receiving notes of this session. Before ending the today's session, I would like to ask you concluding remarks to both of you. You can give concluding remarks today for students.
I think we've had a long session and we've had an interesting session. As I mentioned, I think the reason I suggested this topic, and I'm glad you readily accepted, is that people who have worked so hard to make transplantation a possibility don't really get the recognition that they deserve. See, today, most of us can happily sit there and write so many prescriptions for so many drugs without realizing how the people who have worked towards making those drugs available and clinically applicable have worked hard to get it going. So I think it's always good to look back into the history of things. And sometimes, I'm not sure nowadays, I haven't been an examiner for a long time, but certainly in the Viva, a lot of the older generation of examiners would not hesitate in trying to probe and ask questions related to history of not necessarily transplant, even dialysis and nephritis and various other things. So it's important for students to really what I would say, like read a little bit or look into a little bit into history of how things came. Because, for example, I'll ask one question: how many people have heard of the Red Lake epidemic of post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis today? Any of the students?
They can put their answers in chat box or yeah. So you can put your answers in Q&A.
That was a landmark study which actually showed that acute post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis, this Red Lake is actually a native North American Indian reservation, and they had an epidemic of post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis, and they showed that children make very good recovery and a significant number of adults can progress to renal failure. So it's a landmark study on glomerulonephritis. Same way about Rubin's table for infections post-transplant. Came in New England Journal of Medicine probably about 30 years ago now. And that clearly tells you what are the early transplant infections you can expect post-transplant, what are the late infections. So if somebody asks you, what do you know about Rubin's table? You need to know about it. So when you look at something, also try to take a little glimpse back into the history of how these things happened.
Sundar sir?
I think I would reiterate what Dr. Thakur sir said. History is important. I think only when you know history, we can know what the future holds for us, especially now with the COVID pandemic. Even though 100 years ago with the Spanish flu, that pandemic, same things are still being followed, whether it's masking or social distancing, that has not changed. So we learn from history. And it's great to have professors like Dr. Chacko with us to tell us, because he has gone through from the beginning, from the first transplant till now, we know the full story. So it's important that students, as you rightly said, not only for the exam, even otherwise, I think we should have a separate session on history of nephrology or history of dialysis, history of transplant as part of the curriculum. I think that's important.
So thank you very much. I would like to ask students to stay tuned with us for second session. It would be very soon communicated to you, the time and the date and the link. So thank you so much, sir, Chacko sir, for sparing your time. And thank you so much, sir, Sundar sir, for sparing your time. So thank you so much to all participants.
Thank
Thank
you,
you so
Sanjeev.
much. Thank you so much, sir.
Okay,
Thanks a
thank
lot.
you.
Thank you so much.